Hi, my name is Justin Schaff and I'm the engineering lead at PatchMyPC. We develop a third-party patch management solution that integrates into Configuration Manager. Prior to my current role, I was also a premier field engineer at Microsoft supporting Config Manager. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how you can service Windows 10. So there's really two different scenarios that I want to cover. One's going to be if you're already running Windows 10, how you can use the Windows 10 updates feature within the Config Manager console to deploy the latest build of Windows 10 out via a software update. And then we're also going to talk about how you could use a task sequence to perform an in-place upgrade. So that could be upgrading from a previous build of Windows 10 to the latest, or that could also cover going from Windows 7 to Windows 10, doing an in-place upgrade. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing that I'm going to look at is how we can upgrade an existing build of Windows 10 to the latest version of Windows 10 that you want to deploy. So in my lab, I'm running Config Manager 1802. This feature for servicing Windows 10, it's been around quite a while. I think it's been around since the first build of current branch of SCCM, which has been a couple years. So in this instance, what we're going to do, we're going to show you how you can use that update under the Windows 10 servicing node within your console here, and how we can use those updates to deploy and upgrade previous builds of Windows 10 to the latest. So within the Windows 10 servicing node, this folder right here at the root, if we zoom in on that, we can see that we have an overview of what builds are already out there in our environment. So in my case, I can see that I have 3 machines, it looks like, running 1803, and then we have 1 machine running the 1703 build of Windows 10. Now, optionally, you can create something called a Windows 10 ring and then create a servicing plan. Generally speaking, when I was a config manager engineer and supporting different customers, I would say most people didn't feel comfortable with creating a servicing plan. That's where you can essentially say, hey, I want to deploy any new build once it's been out for X number of months or days to a collection. So you can almost think of it as ADRs for software updates, but you can use it for deploying new builds. Now, you certainly could use staging collections in this way. So you could certainly get tests in. But for the most part, I found that most people probably don't feel too comfortable using a servicing plan that just auto deploys. Usually they just want to jump down just one space here to the Windows 10 updates. And then you could actually see the different editions and updates available. And then you could choose to deploy that update to a collection. Now, either of these will work. In this demo, what I'm going to show you is how we can just deploy that update to a collection and not using the built-in servicing plan. So what we can see within my console, I've got the Windows 10 1803 update showing, and I've got the different English editions kind of showing up here. And then we have the business and the consumer editions. So for the business edition, we can kind of see that that's showing that we have 3 machines that have that build installed. So that's going to be those 3 machines running the 1803 build. And we have one that's showing required. So that's going to be the machine running 1703. So the applicability for the update is going to be handled within the update itself. So in theory, we could actually deploy this to a collection of really any collection kind of out there, and the applicability would determine whether a previous build of Windows 10 is running, whether or not they would actually download and install this update based on that deployment. Now, with that said, that's not to say that you shouldn't use things like collection queries to maybe only target previous builds. That's totally fine as well. And you definitely would want to use staging collections, and we'll kind of go over that process coming up here. One thing that I will mention is you'll probably notice my updates here might be quite a bit cleaner than yours. If you want to see kind of what I did to decline all the languages that I'm not interested in, as well as all the previous builds, so things like 1709 and 1703, things that I really weren't interested in because they're no longer the latest build, I have an update on maintaining the WSUS catalog and declining updates. I'll include the video link right in the top right of this video in case you want to check out that. That's why I'm only seeing the 2 updates here that I'm actually interested in. All right, so just like any other software update, we do need to target them to a collection. So the way that I kind of have this set up is I decided I wanted to make a new folder called Windows 10 Upgrades. So for this, I've got 3 different collections here. I've got a pilot collection, that's going to be my IT department. I've got an early adopter collection that would be maybe a bit of a broader group of machines. And then I have a broad deployment. So these are just kind of how I'm staging this out. Now, if we actually look at these collections, we can see that they're limiting to the different software update collections that I have for the same location or testing groups. Now, if you want to see how I went and created these, this is also going to be a different video for my software updates video. I'll include the link in the top right of the video, but I kind of explained, hey, this is how we're creating these 3 different collections. One's going to be the initial target, then we're going to have an early adopter, and then we'll have kind of all machines for that 3rd phase. So be sure to check that video out if you didn't already follow that. But what I want to do is kind of simulate how this might look in a production environment. You would just want to make sure when you actually target these Windows 10 1803 upgrade to existing Windows 10 machines, you would probably want to limit that so you're doing it in scope. So you're going to have a small group, maybe testing IT that you would probably deploy this build out first to, and then you could increase the scope over the coming months after you verify that things are working okay and you don't have any compatibility issues. So these collections, we can see they don't have any members. So all I've really done is created the empty collection with the names, and then I pointed them to my different limiting collections. So what we could do to actually come in here and create our criteria is we come into our membership rules. We could do a query rule, and I'm going to call this Win10 less than 1803. So any previous builds we could target here. So within my collection criteria, I'm going to basically go out and say, show me any previous builds. So we're going to do the operating system attribute class, and then we're going to do the build number for the attribute that we're searching on. If I click the values tab, that's going to basically show me what builds are currently out there. So I know that Windows 10 1703 is going to be this 15063 number. Now I'll include a link in the description that kind of goes over all the different editions, so things like 1703, 1709, etc., what the actual corresponding build number would be in case you wanted to go and create multiple conditions to get previous builds. So we'll go ahead and add that. We'll do OK on that and apply. All right. So if I refresh this, I think that the machine that I want to target for my first test here, it should be in that pilot group. So we should see that machine, hopefully we get this collection populated with 1 member. So if I go ahead and look, it looks like we're good. And this is the machine that is running the 1703 build that we're going to target this update to. All right, so that looks good. So coming back to our collections here, we could basically repeat that query for the different stages of collections. Now, if this was production, you would, as you start increasing the scope to these broader collections, you should start seeing more members kind of populate in here. In my case, I've only got 1 machine that we're going to target, so I'm just going to use the pilot collection for now. So going back to our update, like I kind of mentioned, the applicability will actually be handled within the update. So in theory, you could have actually deployed this feature upgrade directly, if you wanted to our software update collection that kind of contains all those machines over here. So this software update one, we could even have deployed that directly to these different collections with all the machines, and then the update applicability could have actually handled whether or not there's any previous builds of Windows 10 that could actually use this update. So either of those 2 methods would work fine. So I'm going to go ahead and choose deploy. What I generally like to do here is I'll just give it a better name here. So Windows 10 1803 pilot, just to know, hey, this is only going to my pilot collection. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my upgrade and then choose that pilot group that I just created. We're going to make it a required deployment. That's fine. I'm going to give it a week deadline, so we're actually going to Software Center to install this. I'll keep the default for the notifications. That's fine for what I'm doing here. Optionally, if you wanted to allow things to happen outside of a maintenance window, you could allow the update to install and or reboot, depending on how you'd want to deploy this update. I think I'm okay for the download settings. If you wanted to allow it to fall back to a different boundary, you could do that here, or the site boundary. We could enable that option, that's fine. So that looks fine, and then we'll go ahead and choose next to deploy it. So that's kind of one method that we can use. So we can use the software update feature essentially under the Windows 10 servicing node if you wanted to deploy the update just using a software update. That's probably the easiest method, and it's going to be slightly smaller as far as the size of the update that needs to get downloaded as compared to a task sequence. So next, I'll show you how we can use a task sequence to do the upgrade. So going over to our operating systems node here. So if we look at our operating system upgrade packages, that's what we need to start with first. So if you want to deploy a new build of Windows 10 using a task sequence, you need to import a operating system upgrade package. So what that essentially is, we can see that I've got the ISO downloaded, so you will need the ISO of the build that you want to deploy. What I did, I went ahead and mounted it, and then I copied that to a folder using a UNC path that I use for content sources. So if I look here, we can see that this is just the extracted ISO. So this contains pretty much the same exact structure that the extracted ISO is. So we've got the setup.exe. Within the sources, we're going to have the install.wim that actually kind of contains all the compressed files that actually get installed here. So if we look at the size of this actual upgrade package, we just look at that folder, we can see it's about 4.27 gig. So we'll come back and we'll kind of compare that size. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and add an operating system upgrade package. I'm going to point to that path. This is going to be the 64-bit edition, and it's going to be English. Okay. English United States. So that's the ISO that I'm using here. We'll do next here. It's going to just copy the name from the folder. I think that's probably fine. I'll just leave it there. Version, I'll just say 1803. We'll do next here. And then we'll add that in. So we'll do close on this. And now we can see we have our upgrade package. So first thing I'm going to do here is go ahead and get the content distributing so we can get a task sequence created and deployed. Close on there. Now, one thing that you could do if you wanted to is you could basically install updates that have been released for this build. So if we click on the update package and choose schedule updates, we could optionally go out and do a offline servicing, which would essentially inject updates into that WIM file for that extracted operating system upgrade package. In my case, we're not going to do offline servicing. I'll just use the software updates within my task sequence, but this is certainly something that you can do, but for time's sake, I'm not going to do this within this video. If you do want to see offline servicing, I do talk about this in detail in my introduction to operating system deployment, and I'll be sure to include a link in the top right of this video. All right, so now that we've got that imported, we can go ahead and make a task sequence to do an in-place upgrade. So there's really, when we talk about why you might use one option over the other for doing a upgrade for Windows 10, the task sequence is going to give you a little more flexibility because just like any other task sequence that we can use here, we can do custom steps. And I'll talk about that a bit more when we go into this task sequence. So we want to make sure that we choose upgrade an operating system from an upgrade package. We want to choose that template. We're going to call this Windows 10 1803 upgrade. So that should be fine here. Let me just do x64 so we know the architecture. Now we're going to browse out to that upgrade package that we just imported. Now, one thing that you can see here, since we're using the extracted media directly from the ISO, we're going to have all these different image indexes. So these are going to be the different editions of Windows that are within that image. So for my case, I'm going to do the Windows 10 Enterprise Edition, but you could even select any of these if you're just using the default media that you extracted. So for the index that we want to select, we're going to choose Windows 10 Enterprise. Optionally, if you needed to enter a product key, if you're using a Mac key, for instance, you could go ahead and enter that key in here. For that, I think I'll leave that empty. We can do next here. I'm going to just go ahead and run the step to say, hey, install any required updates. So any updates for Windows 10 that are targeting this machine that it needs, So let's say, for example, we went from Windows 10 1703 to 1803, which is what we're doing here. If we had any updates that were released and being targeted to the device that's running the task sequence, it could go ahead and install any of those cumulative updates directly when the task sequence is doing the upgrade. So we'll go ahead and leave that option enabled. If you wanted to, you could bring any applications over. So if you're migrating from, let's say, Windows 7 or even a previous build of Windows 10 to the latest one within our task sequence that we're using, we could go in and we could add different applications that we want to install during the task sequence. In my case, let me just select 7-zip just for a test here. Looks good. We'll do next here and then close. So if we actually go and look at what's happening during this task sequence, there's a few things that kind of go on here. The first thing that happens is it's going to make sure that it is ready to do the upgrade. So this is going to make sure that we have, it looks like 2 gig of RAM. We have a processor of 1 gigahertz, and we're running on a client OS. So since this would be running to an existing device that already has the client doing an upgrade, we would basically make sure that it is in fact a workstation. So if you inadvertently targeted this task sequence to a server, it would just say, hey, this check would fail, and it wouldn't continue with the upgrade. There's a few folders it looks like it makes by default here where you could add different steps in here if you wanted to do something. But kind of the key piece that's happening here is the upgrade operating system. So this is where it's going to download that update package, and then essentially the task sequence is going to call the setup.exe for the installation of 1803, and it's going to start performing that in the background. There's a few different options here that you could optionally set. In my case, I think we'll leave everything default. Then we have our step here to install updates. So this was going to be the step that I enabled during the wizard. So it's going to go ahead and search out and install any updates that are needed. We also have the step to install application. So I went ahead and added 7-zip in here. And then that's basically kind of what this task sequence would do. Now, if you wanted to add any type of customization after you do your upgrade to Windows 10 1803, this is where we could add any type of steps that we wanted here. So maybe, if we zoom out here and say, hey, I want to add a different command line or maybe a script or a package to do any type of customizations. Maybe you want to uninstall some of the native Windows 10 universal applications that are installed during the upgrade. This is where you could do any type of customization that you may need to do after you get that upgrade going. So this is probably one of the most common reasons people would prefer to use a task sequence to do an upgrade versus using that software update that we deployed earlier, because you can do some customizations if you need to do that after the upgrade. So I think that looks good. So what I'll do, I'll go ahead and deploy this, and we're going to target the same collection that we used for our Windows 10 feature upgrade using the software updates feature. I'm going to make it available just so we would have to actually select to install it in Software Center. You could certainly make it required if you wanted. We'll do next here and then next here. Now, since this is a task sequence, you probably would want to be more specific with your targeting. You would want to make sure, hey, the collection I'm deploying this to is in fact going to be Windows 10 devices that are running previous builds if you only wanted to upgrade Windows 10. You couldn't be as generic like you could potentially with the update, because the update already has the applicability, so it only would install on Windows 10 devices. If you're deploying a task sequence to do a Windows 10 upgrade, you could actually target previous builds, so you could even upgrade things like Windows 7 or Windows 8. So keep that in mind. If you did only want to upgrade Windows 10 devices, you would want to make sure that your collection that you're targeting is searching out and showing previous builds of Windows 10 that would be your target collection for actually doing the task sequence upgrade. Now, we do also have a machine here that is running Windows 7, so I did want to show you that process. So what I'll do here is we'll go ahead and make a copy of this. I'm going to rename this. We'll call this 04 Windows 10. Let's zoom in there. So we're going to call this Windows 7 to Windows 10 1803 upgrade. Okay. I'll zoom out here for the criteria. Now, I'm going to do a direct rule because I only want to test this on one specific device in my environment that's running Windows 10. So we're going to go ahead and say, hey, this Windows 10 device, we're going to go ahead and add that in here. So you would certainly want to make sure that you're more selective if you did actually want to migrate Windows 7 to Windows 10 using a task sequence. You'd want to make sure that you don't accidentally add things that you don't want to add here, because this would do that upgrade. So there we go. Looks like that collection's loaded up just fine, and we can see that Windows 7 device here. So jumping back to my task sequence, I'm going to go ahead and target that as well. I'm going to keep it as available, so I would actually have to initiate the task sequence upgrade within Software Center. You could make it required if you knew that you had the collection just how you wanted it and you only had the machines you wanted to force a upgrade on. You could certainly make it required, but you just want to make sure that you're pretty careful with that collection, that it's exactly what you need, because this would in fact upgrade those devices to Windows 10 if you made it required and forced. All right, so that looks good. To compare the size, so if we remember our task sequence, our upgrade package was about 4.25 gig. So that was the whole extracted ISO. Now, if you were using the software updates feature, for the 64-bit version, we can see that it's about 3.2 gigs. So you would save about a gig of download size if you're using the software update versus a task sequence. So keep that in mind. One other thing, if you're managing clients out on the internet using CMG or internet-based client management, if you use the task sequence, the client would have to download all that content back from your network. So whether that's through your CMG server that's hosted in Azure, or if it's internet-based client management, it would download it from that site system for those internet clients. Now, if you're using the software update, we can see that we're actually downloading the update into our update package directly from Microsoft. So just like any other internet clients, if they don't already have the update downloaded in their cache, instead of using your environment, whether that's your CMG server or internet-facing site system, it would actually be able to download this directly from Windows Update since it's already on the internet. So keep that in mind if you are managing internet clients. If you use the task sequence, it would download that whole package because that wouldn't be available out on Windows Updates. So it looks like our update package has been distributed, so that looks good. So if we jump over to our client, this is a Windows 10 device, so we should have both options essentially available. So we have the update deployed, so if we click on the updates node, we can see that we've got our feature update showing up here. So that's going to be the update we deployed. Looks like we also have one of our third-party updates available for it. But then if we click the operating systems tab, you can see that we also have the task sequence that's targeted to it. So we could essentially use either of these options, and I do plan to kind of show you what each of these would look like on the client side. I think first I'll probably get started with the feature update using the software updates feature. So I'll go ahead and click that and choose install. It is going to give us a prompt, since we made this available when they have to select it, that, hey, this is going to be an in-place upgrade. It's going to upgrade your OS, and this could take a little bit of time. So I'm going to go ahead and choose install. If we jump over to our Windows 7 device, we can see that we have some updates that are needed, but it's not going to be any of those Windows 10 upgrades. So those Windows 10 updates, so if we look back at the update we deployed, these would only be applicable to Windows 10 devices. You couldn't upgrade a Windows 10 device using the software update for the Windows 10 servicing. It just won't show applicable. This is only designed to update previous builds of Windows 10. So if you're running Windows 7, your only option would be to do the task sequence. So since we targeted that, we can see that showing up here. So I'll go ahead and kick that off, and we'll let that kind of download and get going in the background. All right, so for the Windows 10 device, so this is the one that we used the software update for and we deployed. I do want to kind of show you what's going on in the background. So within our CCM cache folder, we can see that we've downloaded the package for that. So we've got that 3.2 gig file. So that's going to be our ESD file. That's essentially, it stands for electronic software delivery file. It's very similar to a WIM. It's slightly better compressed than a WIM file. So for the actual WIM, it was about 3.9, I believe, for 1803, where the ESD file would be 3.2. So you can almost think of this as a whim, and it's going to get extracted to actually do the install. So if we actually look at what's going on in the background, we can see the setup host here. So it's extracting the information from that ESD file, and it's basically running the setup.exe to actually perform the install. If we look at that file or the folder structure on the root of C, that $windows.BT, this is where that ESD essentially got extracted to. So we can see it starting to pull out all those setup files and give us all the information we need to do the in-place upgrade. So this would all be happening in the background. Depending on the hardware of the machine, this usually takes maybe between 15 to 30 minutes to actually get it to a state where it's going to restart to actually complete the update. Now jumping over to my Windows 7 device that's using the task sequence to do the upgrade, what I've done is I've gone to my CCM log folder, so C Windows CCM logs, and then I've opened up the SMSTS log folder, and then opened up my task sequence log. So we can see our task sequence is on the upgrade operating system step, and we can see that it's essentially downloaded my package. If we go and look at that folder, we can see that it's going to look actually quite similar to what our ESD kind of looked like when it was extracted here. So it's got the setup files from that ISO, and it's calling the command, it's calling that setup, and then it's basically telling it to do the upgrade with index 3, so that was the enterprise edition, right? It's doing a quiet update, it's giving us the log file where we're going out to, and then it's performing the update. So this is kind of getting everything staged. This is the process that can also take a little while. So I'll go ahead and pause it till we get to that restart step. All right, so the update is still installing Windows 10. I do want to show you something that could be helpful for troubleshooting. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and open CM Trace on this Windows 10 device. Now, what's actually going on in the background when the upgrade is happening, if you wanted to view kind of the log at what's going on, within that C Windows ~BT folder sources Panther, there's going to be a log file called SetupACT.log. So if anything were to fail during the actual upgrade process, this would be the first place that you want to start. Generally, the task sequence log might be pretty generic, and it would just report back what SetupACT tells it was the error code. So if you actually want to dig into it, you could come to this Panther folder and then look at the SetupACT, and the SetupErr.log will generally give you more details why the upgrade failed. All right, so we can see that process for our Windows 10 upgrade using software updates, it just prompted for a restart. Since this was not a required deployment, we can see that it did not force the restart. So I'm going to go ahead and restart now. And this is when it's going to actually restart into Windows PE to actually start laying the files. And this process is when the user wouldn't be able to actually make use of the machine. That whole step that went on in the background where it was running the setup, that all could have happened. If you made this required, that all could have happened during the background and it would have been automated. The actual restart is when things would actually be making the machine unavailable. All right, so looking at the VM, I'm just showing you what the upgrade is actually looking like. So this point is where it actually goes through the 3 different phases where it's actually performing the core upgrade now that it's staged. So I'll go ahead and pause and wait for this to complete. All right, so that upgrade is actually now complete. That probably took under 10 minutes when it actually did the restart where it actually applied that upgrade. So we'll go ahead and log in. It's going to do the first time login since we just did the upgrade. But we should now be at 1803 from 1703 of Windows 10 using the Windows 10 servicing or update feature to upgrade that device. Looks like our Windows 7 machine is just now getting to the restart step. Now the Windows 7 machine, this is the VM that's restarted, and now it's doing the same installation that Windows 10 machine essentially did when it was doing the 1803 upgrade from 1703. This is basically in the same step. It's just migrating from Windows 7 to Windows 10. All right, so back on our Windows 10 machine, we're all logged in. We can see that our client is functioning. If we look at our updates, we can see that we do have that third-party update still available on our device, so that looks good. If we go ahead and do a WinVer, we can verify that we are, in fact, running the 1803 build. So this looks good. The upgrade was successful, and that's really all there is to it using the software updates feature of SCCM. So we'll minimize this guy, and Looks like our Windows 7 machine is still in the process of kind of finalizing that upgrade in the task sequence. So we'll go ahead and pause it here. So now we're in the install updates phase of the task sequence. So at this point, we've already done the Windows 10 upgrade, and now we're going to install the updates. Then the next step is going to be the install applications that I added. And then if you did want to do any customization, this is where it would essentially run. So this is where a task sequence might be helpful instead of using the default software update or servicing method, because you can do some more customization if you needed to when you actually get into the Windows 10 build that you upgraded to. Now we're installing 7-zip. And now it looks like the upgrade is now complete. So if I do a login here, we can see that we're going to go for that first time login as well, since we did the Windows 7 to Windows 10 upgrade. So I'll pause it while this profile gets logged in. All right, so we are now logged in. If we open up Software Center, we can see everything's working well. We can see that the task sequence now shows installed for that upgrade. I didn't really have any user data. The only thing that I had was just the shortcuts for the config manager client and the log location. If I did have user data here, like installed applications or files, they would all migrate over in that in-place upgrade when we went from Windows 7 to Windows 10. I'm not going to worry about going back to my Windows 10 machine and using a task sequence because it's really no different than the way that we did the task sequence to deploy and upgrade Windows 7. The key difference there is that if you want to use the task sequence, that will allow you to do some more customization where you can add different steps during the actual task sequence upgrade. Whereas if you're using the software update, even though it's a little smaller, which is beneficial, you wouldn't be able to do like custom scripts or things directly within the upgrade, because that would have to happen after you get to the latest build, because we can't do modifications within the update. I hope this video has been helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and thank you for watching.